Lifelong iPhone users have probably dealt with this for a long time, ever since iMessage's inception, where you're texting in a group and all of a sudden this green bubble enters in and just ruins the whole group message, right? Now, there are so many reasons why this happens on a regular basis, but I want to talk about in today's video some interesting news that just happened over the weekend when it comes to iMessage and Google. And no, unfortunately, iMessage is not going to be appearing on Google or Android devices anytime soon. So let's get that out of our minds right away. But rather, I want to talk about what one of Google's execs and one of the heads of Android said over the weekend that kind of got the internet stirring. So let's talk about it. Really quickly before we get into our topic, most of you guys who are watching are not subscribed. So if you like the content and what you're seeing in these videos, please remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I come out with a new video. And yeah, let's get back to the video. So first, let me catch you up with what happened over the weekend. So apparently Hiroshi Lockheimer, if I'm saying his name right, who's the head of Android over at Google, tweeted out pretty much a long thread asking Apple to pretty much fix iMessage by allowing it to use RCS. Let me just read the tweet. Essentially, he said that we're not asking Apple to make iMessage available on Android, but we're asking Apple to support the industry standard for modern messaging, which is RCS, in iMessage, just as they support the older SMS, MMS standards. So if you're not familiar with what any of that is, essentially RCS is a newer standard that carriers use and Google has been using more recently to make messaging better on phones and Android devices. Now, SMS and MMS are very, very old. They've been around for quite some time, pretty much since we started sending text messages years ago. And even though RCS is newer, it's also a little bit of an older protocol or older service that's being used to try to send messages to one another. The nice thing with RCS is it does give you a lot of the features that typically iMessage users get on iPhones, on Android devices, and other text messaging apps. Now, I know if you're not in the US, this is probably not a big deal because you're probably using apps like WhatsApp or Line or Telegram or WeChat, all of these web-based services that make messaging a whole lot easier. They're not tied to your phone number, and it's just really not a big deal if you're not in the US. But for whatever reason, there's a huge debate and sometimes an issue between whether you have a blue bubble and you use iMessage or if you have a green bubble and you use Android. And pretty much it's because the experience of using those two messaging apps is terrible. I mean, if you try to send a photo or a video through SMS or MMS from either device, I mean, the experience is just horrendous. Your photos get compressed down so they come out looking very blurry and just very grainy. Videos are heavily compressed. And that's because of some of the limitations of SMS and MMS. They have a limited file size that they can send to different devices using that service. It's also one of the reasons why when we used to text, you would write this long text message and it would get broken up because SMS and MMS have certain limitations to how they send messages. So usually you could only send a text message that's 160 characters. And then once you go over that, whoever received it on the other end was mad because they got 5 or 6 messages all in succession that usually didn't come in order. So a couple years ago, Google decided that they were going to get in the game of pushing RCS and working with carriers to adopt this new standard to make messaging better for everyone. So if you're on a Pixel or an Android device, then most likely you saw that there was some kind of notification that you could now use a service called Google Chat. And essentially what it is it's Google's version of iMessage using this RCS protocol. This protocol that makes messaging better, even though it's still tied somehow to your phone number. I don't know how they do it behind the scenes, but it makes the experience better. You get to be able to see read receipts, you can see typing indicators, you can also react to messages, and you no longer have that limitation when it comes to how long your messages can be. In addition, you can also send larger files. There's very minimal compression, typically depending on the size of the file, and everything just looks and works better. So that begs the question that if RCS is better, then why aren't more carriers using it, and why hasn't Apple adopted it with iMessage and iPhones? And I think really it comes down to the Apple ecosystem, and because of Apple's marketing model, like their business model of keeping you inside the ecosystem. iMessage is great. I love using it, but it's very annoying to have to switch up my messaging app just because Apple refuses to use RCS. I mean, you do feel that little bit of a drop in quality when you're trying to message somebody that doesn't have iMessage. And same thing goes when I'm using Google Chat to message somebody that has RCS or Google Messages, and the experience is just better. If Apple adopted RCS, what it would do is when you send a message to somebody who has an Android device, you would get still a lot of the features that iMessage has, even though it's not using iMessage. And you would also get better security when it comes to sending those messages, so better encryption, so to speak. But Apple publicly refuses to do it. They haven't made any comments on it. So I think it's very interesting that Hiroshi sent out this tweet because it kind of puts a little pressure on Apple. I mean, in the court of public opinion, does it seem like Apple is purposely doing this to keep people locked in the Apple ecosystem? Or do they really feel like what they're creating in iMessage is better? I mean, there's no way that they can think that defaulting to SMS and MMS in 2022 is better, right? I mean, right, help me out here. But hopefully this puts a little pressure on them, and maybe we'll see Apple add RCS to iMessage down the future. iMessage still has some great features that are proprietary to iMessage, so it's not like they would give those up, but it would make it better for both parties. If you're on an Apple device and you message somebody on an Android device, well, now you don't have those crappy photos and video coming through. You don't have the character limitations. I mean, they could still keep the bubble green for all I care, as long as it still worked almost as good as iMessage. And on the other side, if you're on an Android device, well, now you can get some of the benefits that you would get on an Apple device, except for you're not tied to an iPhone. And essentially, it would just make it easier for people to communicate across the board. Just think if I could only use one messaging app to communicate with all my friends and family and just everybody across the board, and I didn't have to use multiple apps because the primary one was just good, right? Who knows? That remains to be seen. I want to know from you guys down in the comments, what do you think? Do you think that Apple is playing hardball here? Do you think that they won't adopt RCS just because they want to keep you locked in the ecosystem? Or do you honestly think that what Apple has in iMessage is better than anything that RCS and any other message app can produce? Let me know down in the comments. But as always, that's gonna do it for this video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I come out with a new video. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.